Yeah.
Soesterberg was really a eye opener for me.
And Soesterberg was also what I read under the command of the Dutch Air Force, which is kind of rare in the United States Air Force that a foreign nation is actually commanding this. Is this true that the
In
Dutch?
a lot of ways, it was. Yeah, we were under the authority of a organization called Second Allied Tactical Air Force, which is, if you picture a map of Europe, it's a lateral band that goes from the UK right across the northern part of Europe all the way over to what was then the border with East Germany. The next big lateral zone to the south of that was the 3rd Tactical Air Force. That's where Bitburg was. And down to the south of that was the 4th Allied Tactical Air Force. Way up north, 1st Allied Tactical Air Force. That was mostly Norwegians and like that. F-100s, I think they still had when I first got there. But anyway, we were working for NATO. We were working for
Mhm.
NATO under the command of 2nd Allied Tactical Air Force. And we had NATO TACAVLs instead of Air Force ORIs inspections. Uh, and everything we did was under NATO rules. And we were the only unit in USAFE that wore that kind of a patch that we wore with the royal colors on it for Soesterberg. We were the only ones allowed to do that. There was some resentment of that too. We'd go down to Bitburg where
Yeah.
we had to go for our simulator training because we didn't have one up at Soesterberg, and people were always bitching about our patches. We were so proud. We were so proud of them. Anyway,
And the Wolfhound that was actually made by Walt Disney, right?
yeah,
The
Walt Disney designed the actual Wolfhound. It was
yeah.
in the World War II. The unit at the time was based in the Caribbean somewhere, I believe. And Walt Disney designed that Wolfhound patch, and of course, that was really an amazing thing. The I mentioned the royal colors. You see the wreath going around the Wolfhound has little orange dots on it. Those are oranges
Yep.
for, of course, the Dutch ruling family, the House of Orange, and then, of course, the crown up above. So,
Yeah.
kind of a special thing. But we've also got USAFE on it.
The
We were
squadron.
under
Yep.
USAFE's authority as well, of course.
How did you like living in Holland in general? You
We
lived in
when we first went over, there was no military housing for Air Force people at Soesterberg Air Base. Everybody lived out in the community. You'd find a place to rent. In my case, my wife and we have 2 children by now. We rented a little house in a village called Hoevelaken, about 25 kilometers away from the airbase. Other people live closer, other people live farther. But we were very happy in Hoevelaken, had wonderful neighbors. Uh,
you flew the A models, but you also flew the C models in Soesterberg.
yeah,
Or
my training was in the A model. My first year at Soesterberg was flying the A model.
uh-huh.
Uh, After a year at Soesterberg, they decided we were going to upgrade to the C model. When the C model first came out, the 2 major differences were the C model had about 1,500 more pounds of internal fuel capacity, and it had a more advanced radar. It had a radar that was programmable. You could adjust software on the ground and make the radar do different things. I think the air to ground mode that we had in the A model went away with the introduction of the C model too, which was more specialized for air to air. The very first day we had a C model on alert. In fact, I was on alert that day and I was flying the C model. We got a real active scramble. There
Hmm.
was aircraft activity, heavy aircraft activity, just on the eastern side of the front line there. Just on their side, a
Yeah.
lot of intense aircraft activity. That's what they told us when we scrambled. We vectored due east right to the border. When we got to the border, we'd been looking in with our radars as we approached. There was nothing there. But we got to the border. We had about a half hour of fuel remaining. We set up a counter-opposed racetrack pattern so that one of us was always pointing into East German airspace and looking with the radar. The other one was turning away, and then when the other one turned back, he's looking, and now you're looking the other way. Never saw anything after about a half an hour of no joy, no contacts. We flew home and landed. I was told the next day by Intel people that in fact there had been a lot of aircraft activity just before we scrambled, and that what was really going on was there was a ground-based intelligence operation on the East German side looking at the pulses from the C model's radar to see what the differences were. So they knew about the C model being on alert on the very first day. They lured us out. They got whatever intel they got from looking at the raw radar strobes, and probably to some benefit of theirs. And that was the time I started to realize, this Cold War shit is actually pretty serious
Yeah.
stuff. There's stuff like that going on all the time. Some of it we knew about, some of it we didn't. Uh, but I know that there were higher up levels in NATO that were thinking about this kind of stuff all the time. And we were there on the front lines, and like any frontline soldier, like I just said, sometimes you know what's going on, sometimes you don't, but you do. You do what needs to be done. And that was pretty serious stuff.
And these pulses are they were. Is that something that is can be used for the radar warning receiver, the raw? For,
Yeah, in fact, that's how radar warning receivers work. They work on analyzing the radar strobes from other aircraft or surface to air missile sites on the ground or whatever. Uh, they're all different. They all have their own peculiarities. And if you have that kind of information, you can develop a radar warning system like we had that tells you approximately where whoever is looking at you is located. That's about as far as I can go with classified type information. But
Mhm.
but these aren't that different from radar receivers that people carry in their cars. Yeah,
I'm thinking about a story about this. I think this was a pilot in Vietnam that was actually using a radar detector.
I think I've heard that story too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that you were interested in. I spent some time in my career working flight safety, and that started at Soesterberg uh, with a accident. This was, I think I'd been at Soesterberg for about 2 years at this point. There was a, it was the anniversary of the Dutch Air Force, I think, RNLAF, and the Soesterberg Airfield was putting on a big open house and an air show. They invited in aircraft and static display aircraft from all the other NATO nations. They scheduled flying demos of different types of aircraft, and the Air Force decided to give them a flying demo with the F-15, among other things. So at that time, there was one demo pilot for the F-15 in Europe, and that role would switch between Soesterberg and Bitburg. And at the time, Bitburg had it. So Bitburg sent up an F-15 with a pilot, and because there had been some kind of a semi-credible terrorist threat, they told this fellow to land at Gills Orion, about 60 kilometers down the road. And he would land there, spend the night at Gills Orion. The next day, he would take off, fly into Soesterberg, or fly near Soesterberg and hold until it was his time for the air show, and then do his air show on runway centerline at Soesterberg. But now, instead of going back to Gills Orion to land after the air show, he was going to land at Soesterberg. So that was the plan. Just coincidentally, a new pilot, a friend of mine from pilot training, uh, he'd been a T-38 FAPE while I was a T-37 FAPE advanced. And he and I and our wives knew each other, our kids knew each other. So when he got an assignment to Soesterberg, I was going to be his sponsor. And Donna and I and our kids, we had driven up to Schiphol Airport to pick them up when they flew in and welcome them and drive them back down to Soesterberg, get them in a hotel, get them comfortable and settled in. Well, we're up at the airport at Soesterberg. We're up at the airport at Schiphol, and Mike and Lori are off the airplane. We're all standing there together in the entrance lobby or outside of customs, and getting ready to get in our car and drive home. And I got Captain Woodford, please answer the white courtesy phone announcement came over the speakers. Oh, I found the phone. It was the command. It was a friend of mine at Soesterberg, a fellow pilot, who knew I was up there and wanted to track me down and tell me that the guy from Bitburg that was doing the air show in the F-15 had just crashed just minutes ago. I thought, oh hell, that's terrible. Uh, so I told Mike and Laurie, and I said, well, we'd better head on back. By the time we got back to the airbase, we dropped them off at a hotel in town called the Hotel Rodishin. That's where all new arrivals would stay for a month or so until they found housing. And there was another message for me at the desk of the Hotel Rodishin to call the command post. I called the command post. It was my boss, I think it was Colonel DeLauder at the time, who told me that had been assigned to the mishap investigation board for this F-15 that had just crashed. I turned right around, drove out to the base, which was just a few minutes away. There was this broken F-15 in the middle of the infield. You could still smell the burning metal, fuel. They had just taken the pilot away. Uh, it had all just happened very recently, and still smoldering wreckage, still smoke. So that was my first mishap board. I was the investigating officer. We investigated that mishap for about a month. For me, that involved a lot of trips back and forth to Bitburg to interview the pilot, a man named Keeler, Denny Keeler, call sign Dutch. Uh, nice guy. He had convinced himself that in his final turn to land, and keep in mind, he had never actually landed at Soesterberg before. This was brand new to him. He'd come up from Gills Orion Air Base the night before, done this air show, and now he's landing at Soesterberg for the first time ever. And because the air show was on a angled runway, the Dutch runway, when he pitched up to land on this runway, the Dutch runway goes off this way, the Air Force runway goes this way. We pitched up to land. He was a lot tighter into our runway than he realized, and that 90-degree turn, 180-degree turn he had to make to land was just on a knife edge. He had actually rolled to full 90 degrees of bank at one point. We know this because there were 1,000 Dutch people out there with video cameras, but he had gone to a full 90 degrees of bank and was just hauling that sucker around that turn as tight as he could. Well, when you go to 90 degrees of bank, you've got no lift, right? So you're dropping like a rock. And by the time he realized he was dropping like a rock and started rolling out and pulling back, it was too late. He was going to hit the ground, and he did. Hit the ground, broke the aircraft in half right behind the cockpit. The aircraft came to a stop in the grass. The canopy had flown off during this sequence of crashing. He jumped out, ran away from the airplane, left both engines in no power, I believe. The video I saw, you could see him sucking grass and dirt in, blowing it out the tail. It was one of the responding firemen, I don't know if it was American or Dutch, actually had to reach inside the cockpit, pull up the finger lifts, and shut the throttles off. But that was all very exciting. Anyway, I spent a whole month going back and forth to Bitburg. Anyway, Dutch believed that it was a problem of power and engine response, that he had thrown the power up to full military power when he started that turn, knowing that he'd need power. And he said it didn't feel like the engines responded to him. About a month after we wrote our mishap report, and our basically mishap report, from all the evidence we could amass, said there was nothing wrong with the airplane, that the engines were working properly, that he had just misjudged his turn and got himself into a high sink rate from which he could not recover before the airplane hit the ground. It was basically a basic pilot error type of mishap, complicated by the fact that he had never landed at Soesterberg before, that the show had been on an angled to a different runway, which caused him to pitch in very close to the active runway, all of that. We had come to those conclusions ourselves. We had already briefed the safety commander down at Ramstein. About a month later, Dutch teenager knocked on my door in Hoevelaken, and he had an envelope full of black and white photographs that he had taken that he had not come forward with before because he was afraid he was going to get in trouble. Because he had actually gone inside the fence of the airbase into the restricted area and was laying in the grass with some other kids taking pictures, laying in tall grass where nobody could see him. Well, anyway, his photographs showed clearly from the position of the intakes and the exhaust nozzles, which you could see in the photos, that both engines were in fact working perfectly. Uh, so I had this evidence now. I called the colonel who had chaired the mishap board, told him what we had, told him why the kid hadn't come forward yet, and we added those photographs to our report, but that didn't change any of our conclusions. But that was my first experience with aircraft mishap investigation. I have to confess, even though I didn't get to fly for a month, I liked it. Oh, this is fun, you know? You get to connect A to B to C to all the way to Z. Uh, you get to figure out stuff that happened. But this was an easy one. We had a living pilot as a witness, front row witness. We had all this video evidence from all the people at the air show, and we even had this kid that came up later with
How did the
photographs.
kid know that you were the investigator? It was just pure luck, huh?
That's a good question. That probably goes back to what we
Or
talked about earlier
or
with
he read
these.
he read the preliminary report,
Well,
maybe.
no, there would be an accident report that would be separate. You know how the Air Force does a mishap report and an accident report.
Aha, that's different.
The
Yeah.
accident report names names, but the mishap report is all secret and confidential. But somehow he knew who I was and came to my house.
There was Soesterberg. After Soesterberg, you went to Alaska.